Welcome back to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. This is Probate, the final tax on your time, money, and family. We're going to talk about why probate is a really bad thing, okay? There's probably only one person who likes probate, and that is attorneys, because it's a mess, it takes a long time, and we're going to talk about that. Why do we want to avoid probate? So you could be watching this episode because you just lost someone, or you've heard about probate and you're looking for some answers. Both of those are great reasons to watch this podcast. So welcome back, and we're going to get started in just a sec.
You're listening to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. Here's your host, Stephen McClellan.
All right, welcome back to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. We're talking all things probate today. And the reason for that is we get so many phone calls every single year. I think on average, we get about 150 to 200 phone calls about probate. And I'm going to tell you, statistically, that most of them, there isn't a need for probate. There is a need for understanding what is and is not probate. There's a need for assurance, peace of mind. And so we can afford that by talking about the pros and cons of probate, or whether you need it or not. But for the people who do need probate, the 25% or so, there's a lot of things to know about it before you jump in, okay? And I feel uniquely qualified to talk about probate for a few reasons. First, of the court cases that we file, over 90% of them are probate, so I'm pretty well versed in probate. Number two, I've been asked to speak on probate to the Arkansas bar, so I've had a chance to preside over, a room full of probate attorneys, and compared to them, I file more probates than the average attorney in Arkansas. And lastly, I've done a lot of research on probate, on the numbers, and statistically speaking, it is shocking that probate cases in our state have increased. I think it's like 20% over the last 10 years. So here's the problem. You know it's bad, okay? If nothing else, we know it's not great. And it's something that's increasing. So gives you pause for how can we do things differently. And before we dive into probate, this is what I told the attorneys, because I when I spoke in front of that room full of attorneys, I think it's 40, 50 attorneys, I said, look, many of us do estate planning. And we tell clients this will make things easy, or this will avoid probate. And the facts are it's not happening. We have to do a better job. So this podcast is just an extension of that hour-long presentation I gave to the bar to talk about probate in sort of for the public to hear about. So it's not decreasing, it's increasing. And before we dive into some of the things, I think it's increasing for a few reasons. One, the do-it-yourself estate plans have just come about over the last 10, 15 years, more so than previous generations. And the thing that I'm seeing is it is marketed, because I see these advertisements, and they're like, oh, it's so easy. Look at all these celebrities that do it. My first thought is, I don't think the celebrity uses some online platform. I'm pretty sure that attorney actually uses like a real lawyer. So that's the first thing I laugh at. The second is, if they say it can be done in 30 minutes or less, I think they're overselling, because it takes more than 30 minutes, in my opinion, to do estate planning the right way. So this easy, it's cheap. I mean, there's a price to pay when you try to do things on your own. And so I think that's what's happening. People are trying to do it themselves. And secondly, it's more complicated now than ever, because people have assets everywhere. The fact that you can go online and open a bank account in any state, and these banks that don't even have a physical presence has never existed before. So it's more complicated than ever before. And so it's more complicated, and there's people saying it's simple, and that's just a recipe for what we're seeing, which is more and more probates in my state. So if you don't know anything about probate, first thing to know is it's very time-consuming. And when I say time-consuming, I'm basing this on Arkansas law, which happens to be one of the worst. As I've talked to my colleagues in Texas and in other states, apparently it's not so bad. But here in our state, there are two types of probates. And if you got over $100,000 in assets, you're sitting at least 7, 8 months or so. And with having to file final taxes, sometimes that can be stretched out for well over a year. And when I did the analysis on all the cases that were filed in Pulaski County, I think it was over 2 years. The average probate is over 2 years. And that's a lot. That's a lot of time, right? That's a lot of time eaten up. One of the reasons it takes so long is we have a publication notice. You have creditors have 6 months to file claims in our state. 6 months. That's a really, really long time. So that's one of the reasons why probate cases take so long. Number 2, expensive. Okay, it's expensive because attorneys are entitled to their fee before anyone else gets paid, which is helpful because sometimes when I talk to the family, the debts may be greater than the assets. If that were the case and the attorney didn't get paid, they wouldn't touch it at all. So wisely, attorneys get paid off the top. Okay, and there's court costs, appraisals, even the executor can be paid like 3%. So in some cases, the personal representative actually gets paid more than the attorney does in those cases. Average probate, I think, is anywhere from $8,000 to $11,000. It just kind of depends on the family dynamics, the court, the judge. I've had situations where some judges are more responsive than others, and sometimes judges, they get busy, and sometimes we have to send them more emails and say, hey, it's been a while. Why haven't you responded to this? The third thing is it's public, okay? Everybody can see what's the estate plan. Everyone gets to see, like the will is not, it's not something that's just read around a table. I see movies like this. It's not how it works. The will is given to a lawyer who files it at the courthouse. We open up probate and get the ball rolling. It is not, we just sit around and so-and-so gets the house and it's done. No, you got to go through the probate process, which is primarily designed for creditors. That's really if you want to, I have a saying that you want to think like a judge. The older I've gotten, let's think like a judge, not an attorney. So a lot of attorneys will tell you and advocate, you've got a great case. And I'm like, well, what is the judge going to say? And here in probate, the judge is concerned about that 6-month creditor period. They're worried about debts. They're worried that on the last day of that creditor period, some $1 million lawsuit could be filed against an estate or something. So that's one of their big concerns about that. But it certainly is not a private affair at all. It definitely delays the inheritance. Some people say, well, can I just ask for part of my inheritance up front? The answer to that is no, because the court again is concerned, well, what if there are debts? Then I have to get the assets back, and they don't like that. So generally that's the case, that you don't get it until the very end of probate. Number 5, of course, it's very emotionally draining. I had it explained to me from a client this way. The client said, every time you call or I get an email from your office, it is like I'm reliving the death of my loved one. And that's really scary, right? That's really scary and sad, and I hate that. But there is this emotional, because you see the person's name on all the pleadings, and I completely understand that. It definitely does not help the grieving process. It does not decrease stress, or if there was any family conflict, it certainly doesn't help. Number 6, the court is in charge. So in my state, if I want to sell a property in probate, I got to ask the judge. So you can imagine the complexity when I had an estate that had, I think it was like 10 or 12 rental properties. We had to ask the judge each time we wanted to sell something for permission to sell that. And the judge is also in charge of the business. If there's a business that goes into probate, I have to ask the court every 3 months. Hey, Judge, is it okay if we keep running this business? That's not fun either. Number 7, encourages family conflict. You disinherited somebody. You've got to tell them. So that's one of the awful things about a probate. I once had a probate case where the testator, that's the one with the will, left, I think it was $10 or $50 to a child. Let me tell you about that. We ended up spending $200-$300 to prove that we attempted to give the money to this person. They just wouldn't accept it. They were so mad about it, they didn't want to accept it. And so I just went to the judge and said, look, Judge, I've done all these things to try to give them their $50. They haven't accepted. And the judge said, well, I think you've done about as best you can. And finally let us close the estate. It was awful.
Thank you for tuning in to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. Our mission is to be your first choice for last wishes. Want to dive deeper? Join us over at the Hearse Chaser Academy, where we've created 8 on-demand courses for each stage of life. From young adulthood to retirement, navigating separation or blended families, and everything in between, we help you plan for the future, no matter where you're at. Now stay with us as the ride continues on the Hearse Chaser podcast show.
Of course, it can be confusing. It is complex. There are legal jargons. There are mistakes. When you do probate, you're basically telling a family member, hey, congrats, you're now going to be an executor. That's a title I don't think anybody wants. Okay, no obituary I have ever read said that so-and-so was so happy to be the executor of someone's estate. It is not fun, okay? And then there's concerns about, well, are there properties in other states? And so it's not like a probate in Arkansas covers all of the probate. If there's land in another state, well, then I've got to deal with a probate in a second state. So it can get more complex if you have multiple assets in most places. Frozen assets, number 10. So perhaps some of the money was being used for helping a child, or was utilized to help a spouse or something. If it's stuck in probate, that kind of freezes that, and you technically can't use that money. It has to be used only for the court, so that can create some complexity there. I don't know if this is so true, but there is some vulnerability to the assets when it is stuck in probate with third parties. It's public information. You get a bunch of scam. That's what happens, because your information is now public record. They have your address, and they can send you letters, and I get calls of, what is this? And I'm like, that's junk. Just throw it away. So you get a little bit extra mail, which is not fun. It's very inflexible. It's not like probate is something that gets evolutionized or enhanced or increased the efficiency of it. It's pretty vague and outdated in my opinion. If you don't have an estate plan, the court has an estate plan for you, which is a big shock, because they say 50% of Americans don't have an estate plan. And I think so that's 50%. 20% of Americans over 80 don't have a will. Okay, so people over 80, 20%, 1 in 5 don't have an estate plan. But I think the statistic that's alarming is 76% of people die without an estate plan, which means that the state that you live in has a plan for where the assets go. And it may or may not be what you want, especially if it is a blended family. And just to give you an example of how that has impacted me, when I first got married, I got married in the summer of June, and I had the decedent estates, which is basically probate, in the fall. And I don't know what week it was, but the professor asked, how many of y'all have been married for less than 3 years? And my hand shot up. I was so happy. I had been married for like 3 months, and the judge said, well, just so you know, in Arkansas, if I die, not everything goes to my wife. It actually kind of gets split between my wife and my parents. But if I'm married for more than 3 years, then that changes. I thought, well, shoot, I'm going to go home and fix that. So that was one of the first things my wife and I did. I said, I'm going to make sure that everything goes to you. I don't want anything to go to my family. So that is an unintended consequence. The big shocker in my state is homes. So if you have a home that's in husband's name, just in his name, he's married, it's a blended family. So when husband dies, the wife typically has a life estate in this property, but the kids, his kids, have the remainder interest. So you can imagine the kids looking over the wife's shoulder, the house is deteriorating and, we want to come in and look at the house and inspect it. Just a host of awfulness, Probate court in our state is judges. I've been told in other states that the people that do probate aren't actually lawyers. They can appoint people, and that's kind of scary to me. I have no idea how that could be. The documents can be lost and outdated. It's not uncommon for maybe a will was done 10 years ago, but things changed and they never updated things, so that's a pain. The executor has a target on their back. And so anybody who is mad or frustrated is going to wear that executor down. They've got liability if they mishandle something. And that's kind of most executors are untrained, and they're often overwhelmed in that capacity as executor. So that's really why they need to ask the attorney, hey, I have questions. I need a little bit of help on this. Tell me what I should do. Beneficiaries are uncooperative. Even when people are entitled to money, sometimes they just don't respond to their family's phone calls, emails. I don't understand that, but if somebody said, "Hey, Stephen, I got $100,000 for you. Would you give me a good mailing address?" I'd give it to you yesterday. But there are some beneficiaries, for whatever reason, they don't want to talk to people, even if they're going to get money. Then taxes. Taxes create some complications, especially I've had this happen before where the decedent did not pay their taxes the way they should in the previous year because they were sick. And so that creates some complexity to things. The truth is, probate is generally avoidable with good estate planning. I just want to make a shout out to our Hearse Chaser Academy. There are 2 stages. There are 8 different stages, but stage 6 is the loss of a spouse. So if you've lost a spouse and you're wondering, do I need probate or not? What are some things I need to know? There's 2.5 hours of content that walks you step by step. It's a masterclass on losing a spouse and things to know. The other one is stage 8. That's not losing a spouse. That's typically losing a parent, losing a child or a friend. So in those contexts, losing somebody who wasn't married. And it's very different when you don't have a surviving spouse, and that's why we broke them down. But both of them are about 2.5 hours. I think there's a lot to know, and it just helps with the mindset before walking into probate. What I will tell you is one of the scariest things. A few years ago, I had an attorney reach out to me and say that they wanted me to do probate, but they just did wills. And I said, that's interesting. Tell me more why you don't do probate. And this particular attorney did not realize that wills do not avoid probate. So there was an attorney that assuming was telling folks that, hey, this will avoids probate. And this particular attorney is not somebody that I would look at that does estate planning. And I think that's very, very important that when you reach out to an attorney, when you talk to one, you ask them, what do you do? Because if an attorney has 4 or 5 practice areas, it is very hard for that attorney to handle all of that. Now, I've, at times, when I first started out, I dabbled in a few things, but over the last 10 years, it's pretty much been estate planning, probate, and elder law. That is it. And so when I get questions, when I get questions about probate, I've been there. I know about probate. And I often ask, well, it kind of depends. What court are we in front of? What judge are we in? That's going to make a big difference. And having good processes and procedures is very important. So if you need a probate attorney, it's very important to ask them, okay, so what % of your practice is probate? How many cases do you file a year? Because I'll see a probate attorney. The biggest mistakes I've seen are from family law attorneys that also do probate. Because family law and probate are very different. Family law is very much arguing over assets and what's the best interest of the child. A lot of arguing there, a lot of advocating. Probate is not that. Probate is, let me say it this way. People have been dying for a very long time, and there is a process. It's very process-driven. It's not argument-driven. So the skills that make family law attorneys very, very good are often the ones that don't do the boring stuff, the process-driven stuff very well. That's just an observation I've had, and often there's just two different things. So if a family law attorney does 90%, 80, 70% family law, and they're doing some probate, you really want to find the attorney that's doing 90% of what you need, okay? That really knows what they're doing, especially if they have a team that helps them. And that's where I think we have a great team and paralegal that helps move those probate cases through, because they do take a really long time and questions pop up invariably. It is a pain. It is difficult. We try to make that process go much shorter. Our average probate is much shorter than the average probate, and that's attributed to us having deadlines and trying to get those cases moving, because we know the longer it is, the more families, there's just more negative energy in it. So if you can, try to avoid probate. Set your family up for success so they're not in this concern about probate. So if you're watching this and you're still alive, which that would be most people, definitely go and talk to an estate planning attorney to make sure you probate-proof your estate plan and don't leave a mess for your family. Thanks for watching the Hearse Chaser podcast. Thanks for riding along. Hope you enjoyed the rest of your day.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. Please remember, you can't outrun a hearse, but you can leave your family with a smooth ride.